Hi, I'm Kevin Bergman, Regional Director for Ag Partners Co-op.
And I'm Matt Fincham, an agronomy account manager over in Marshall County. Today we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the ins and outs of fungicide applications in corn.
So when you think about fungicide on corn, Matt, you guys say, well, I don't have disease, I don't need to spray, but it's a lot more than just that. What other aspects do you have, specifically to the western parts, areas where disease isn't much of an issue typically, but we face other stresses in the plant?
So as we start to look towards fungicide season, typically we're trying to do that close to tassel time, into tassel time, as we get into the reproductive stages of the corn plant. And with that, in northeast Kansas typically comes some very high temperatures, sometimes some drought conditions in July. One of the things that fungicide really helps with as we look to things besides just disease control is that of water use efficiency. The fungicide that we apply typically around the reproductive stages really helps the corn plant when we start to get into some high nighttime temperatures and of course daytime temperatures as well. It helps that plant use water that is available to it much more efficiently.
So specifically, you're looking at stomata control. So you think on a plant, it uses moisture to cool itself, no different than human sweat. Plants use moisture to respire out, cool themselves off. And we can lose a lot of moisture just to a plant simply trying to, let's call it, exist, stay alive. So you're sending energy and moisture out. Well, what a fungicide will do is keep that plant healthier, and it has been proven that plants will respire less, that stomata control is improved, so less energy, less moisture is exhausted on staying alive, and more is available to developing that ear or filling that ear in times of stress. So we've decided we're going to spray a certain field, all of our fields, some of them you've picked out fields that you want to apply fungicide on. The next classic question is when? What's the ideal timing? I know years ago it had to be brown silked. Can't do it before brown silk or we're going to have arrested ear syndrome. And that was a critical error to make if you did have arrested ear syndrome. 200 bushel plus corn that doesn't put an ear on is not a good day. What we've learned from that is there's certain surfactants that have characteristics in there, ingredients in there. So what we use a product called Master Lock. It is containing a non-phenol esters, does not have non-phenol esters in there. Those are the ones that have been linked to arrested ear development. The purpose of a surfactant is to keep the spray droplets wetter on the leaf longer. This reduces losses to evaporation as well as enhances absorption of the product into the leaf, ultimately resulting in more product going to work in the plant. The interlock portion of Master Lock helps reduce fine droplets out of the spray room. These droplets are at the ideal size for deposition, which is a key factor in getting excellent coverage in the top half of the corn plant that is most critical for grain development. So what we can do with that is we can go out prior to tassel emergence. So if you have a field, maybe it's two different hybrids, maybe it's a little bit uneven or different parts, either it's dry land, irrigated, varying degrees, that field may not be ideally all the right time, but with Master Lock in the tank and the fungicides we use today, we can go out prior to tassel and not worry about arrested ear development. So if you go out early, say we want to go out here naturally, probably going to get bad after it tassels. That's when everything goes to crap in corn. If we go early, we can add a micronutrients. You think, what can we add to the tank? One that comes to mind is boron. Boron is very critical in cell wall structure and cell wall health. What that does for us is think of pollen health and think of silk health. So if we get it on prior to tassel, prior to pollination, we hit that bad week of weather, hot, dry, just horrible conditions to pollinate in. That boron helps keep those cell walls structures open in the silks to where that pollen shed drops down, has to enter the end of that silk, travel all the way down into that ear and fertilize that ovule on the ear. If you have heat stress, you have drought stress, those cell walls will collapse. That tube that brings pollen to that kernel is collapsed, and then you have misses on the ear. So boron is an excellent one early if you're thinking prior to tassel, prior to pollination.
Yeah, and one of the other things we look at when we're talking about boron and an application of boron at the fungicide time, boron is a very mobile nutrient within the plant. So it's going to take boron amounts from the lower leaves and start to move them to the tassel, the silk, even to the ear as it begins to form. What that can do sometimes is it can cause some deficiencies in the actual leaves. The top 5 to 6 leaves of a corn plant at tassel time is doing the majority of the work as far as photosynthesizing, capturing sunlight. And so sometimes you can get a boron deficiency in those leaves simply because it just moved it all to the reproductive areas of the corn plant. That's why that's one of the reasons we look at a boron application, because with that foliar feed, it just gives that plant that extra shot of boron to help fulfill that need, help all the transport mechanisms in the plant continue to function at a high rate and a high efficiency. So that's one of the reasons we look at boron at that time.
And the other aspect to think about is boron is an anion in the soil, so you could have an excellent boron fertility program pre-season with dry, but if it's dry, say its mass flow is low, we're not going to get boron uptake. It's also mobile in the soil. We don't have water moving through those roots. If it's dry, that's a problem, but if it's too wet, we leach it down. So it's a finicky nutrient to try to rely on root uptake from the soil, but it is a micro. Needed levels are relatively low, so that makes it an ideal candidate for a foliar application.
One of the last things we wanted to touch on is an aspect of a fungicide application that's maybe not quite as easily quantitative or measurable, I guess, and that has to do of harvestability.
So what we're talking about really is ear intactness. You talk about header loss, be it from ears out of the head or butt shilling on that head. If you do get corn that dries down a little fast, it's hard to manage. Corn's going to dry when it dries, and that's not always a bad thing. But I know there's a lot of growers commenting this year how much volunteer they are seeing in their fields. Just a lot of volunteer corn. I think that's probably a function of one, higher corn yields, so percent header loss is just a percent of a larger number. But we had a lot of corn last year that by the time we cut beans, got that finished, went back to corn, it dried so much and those ears were so flimsy on there that we lost ears out or butt shelling. And then so at that point you have to drive slower. If your plants are not as healthy, if the plant is drier overall, you have a lot more downed corn or even just corn that doesn't want to feed into the head. So there are some growers that they do fungicide every year simply because they can keep separator hours off of their combine, and it helps them bottom line. Truly, they have a metric, they have a value to, I can harvest it even a half or 1 mile an hour faster. That puts money bottom line when I go to trade that combine and there's fewer separator hours on it. If nothing else, it's a lot more fun cutting corn and standing and going into combine than piling up in front of you and seeing them fly off. So to recap, there's a lot of benefits from a fungicide, and it's not just diseases. And we talked about drought stress, heat stress, harvestability, and then even there's some other ones there, and as well as foliar micronutrients we can put on at that time. So think of the fields, and if you want to do something, what's the best thing to do? Call guys like Matt. Call your local area agronomist and hit them up. Say, what hybrids do I have? What ones respond? And chances are we've seen those fields all year, so we'll know which ones are the best candidates.